And then the Adams Semperware post commander started the program. Now, we had all been taught the reasoning behind the name of the post. Lorne Adams, Oliver Simpler, and John Albert Ware, all hometown men, had lost their lives while serving in their country, so it was named after them. And each member of the student body proudly wore a red poppy. Now, we knew what that red poppy was for because we had studied that in history class. We knew that there was an American military cemetery in Belgium where 368 men, World War I soldiers, had died and were buried there in Flanders Field. And those poppies that bloom there, they're the symbol of whom we honor on Memorial Day, but we knew that because we learned it in school. As the American flag went up the flagpole, you could have heard a pin drop on the grounds of the school. There wasn't any laughing, there wasn't any talking, there was a solemn ceremony. The Pledge of Allegiance was recited with all of our hands on our hearts looking upward at the flag as the high school band played the national anthem. The speaker that day always spoke to us about why we were there and why we were saluting the American flag. We learned that freedom is not free. A solemn ceremony followed with organizations and clubs placing wreaths by the flag, commemorating those who lost their lives for our country. The ceremony ended with people like Walter Moore and Dorsey Hammond and Jean Carlisle playing taps. The impression that these ceremonies made on us as children have followed us through life. I can close my eyes and still see that image. After the parade and celebration, we were all dismissed and went home for a family picnic. Some of the families took flags to the ceremony, and I remember my mother's brothers, who all fought in World War II, coming to our house, and we'd all go to the cemetery carrying peonies in quart jars to place on the grave of loved ones and those who have served in their country. Many of you here today remember your fellow class members not finishing high school because they were called to fight in World War II. And some of you may have had family members who fought in World War I as well. But bringing the history book back to real life time, most of us who went to Felton School during the 50s and the 60s, without hesitation, remember the Korean conflict and the Vietnam conflict. For the classes of the 60s, the realness of that event hit them hard in the face as some of our friends were drafted and sent to Vietnam immediately upon high school graduation. Many were there 2 or 3 tours, as are the men and women who are presently serving today from our hometown in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya right now. The current conflicts bring back unforgettable memories for many of us here today, which only reminds us of the Vietnam veteran slogan, "All gave some, but some gave all." Each year we must remember to read the names of the fallen in our small town of Felton and give them the proper respect that they deserve, because they did give their all to protect the small town from which they came. And with that being said, Jeannie is now going to read those names.
As part of our hometown Memorial Day presentation, Jean and Steve and Dolores Minot and I worked very hard to properly recognize our local veterans who taught us that freedom is not free. When we began to gather this list, we found that we didn't have one here in Felton, so hopefully we're going to be turning this over to the VFW Post 6009, and you guys hopefully will never have to add another name to it. First, I must give a disclaimer for credits on the information used for this presentation today. We obtained these records from the National Archives, the Delaware Archives, the National World War I Museum, George and G.S. von Boss book entitled Delaware in Wartime and History of the 59th Pioneer Infantry, 1918 to 1919, Wikipedia, VFW Post 6009 records, the Covet database, and the Kent County Vietnam Veterans Association. World War I is the first we're going to honor. The United States was a participant in World War I for only 18 months. About 10,000 Delawareans entered the armed forces, but many of them were called up too late to participate in the fighting. A battalion of Delaware National Guard was called into service. In March 1917, to guard bridges, particularly those on the main railroad lines across the Brandywine and the Christina, where it was feared German sabotagers might strike. Eventually, these Delaware troops came to constitute the major part of the 59th Pioneer Infantry, which sailed to France at the end of August 1918 and was rushed into the front lines the very next month. Several of the officers who led the Delaware National Guard outfits in the Second World War gained their first combat experience with the 59th Infantry in France at this time. Research has revealed one person from World War I who came from Felton, Delaware, was killed during the action in the war. William Kendall Frampton. World War II. This war officially began on September 1, 1939, when Germany attacked Poland and lasted for 6 long years. When we think of this war, we immediately think of Hitler and Pearl Harbor and the Holocaust. From 1939 through 1945, Delaware provided soldiers, ships, and gunpowder. The DuPont Company played a big part in making parachutes with the invention of nylon. Records show the following people as being killed in action during World War II. Caleb Oliver Simpler, Nathaniel Luff Warrington, Lauren Charles Adams, John Albert Ware, Russell Lewis Brittingham, Robert James Stewart, Carol Franklin Norris Jr., Watson Marker, George Emmett White, Sanford Hubbard Godwin, Ernest Thomas Rowe, John Jacobs Roberts. In addition, after returning from the war and still in active duty status, Elmer Delaney was killed. Next came the Korean War. Between the years 1950 and 1953, a military conflict between North and South Korea took place. Many Americans remember the term Cold War attached to this conflict. The involvement of the United States took place with the failure of the Koreans to hold free elections, which caused many problems, one beginning that North Korea eventually became a communist government. Too many servicemen and women who served in Korea during this time and later in the 60s, the terms the Forgotten War or the Unknown War are attached to their time in service. Through all research done, we identified 6 men killed from Kent County, Delaware, none of which were immediately identified to have come from Felton, Delaware. The Vietnam War. The time of this conflict spanned from 1955 through 1975, with the United States involvement given to help prevent communism takeover in South Vietnam. Many things that come to mind when we think of Vietnam are the length of time that we spent there. Operation Menu involving Laos and Cambodia, Ho Chi Minh, and the 68 Tet Offensive, which was the turning point of the America involvement in the Vietnam War. The opposition of this war still has not been forgotten by many, and the effect it had on many of our servicemen and women returning from Vietnam, which empowered the driving slogan force of their slogan, all have some, all gave some, and some gave all. Being from this era and a classmate of one of the fallen soldiers, only verification needed to take place of any others other than the 2 men was needed. Bruce Edward Dalbo, Robert Hughes Donaway. Desert Storm. The next conflict took place from 1990 through 1991, involving the United States through the United Nations, leading a coalition force against Iraq. The driving force of our involvement was the invasion and the annexation of the state of Kuwait. Other key factors that are familiar during this period are the name of Saddam Hussein and the Saudi Arabia, who was the key supplier of oil and the chemical and biological weapons. To date, with all research done, no military personnel from Felton, Delaware were identified as being killed during active duty. Iraq conflict. Our official involvement took place in 2003 with the leadership of the United States invading Iraq. This conflict has been and is still being fought with the war against terrorism. Not one American standing here today will ever forget the 9/11 attack on American soil. Some refer to this conflict as the Second Gulf War, or Operation Iraqi Freedom. The mission of this operation is to destroy weapons of mass destruction and to bring home our troops, and I need a round of applause here, by the end of 2011.